Tracie, I know that I had read that you had a UFO experience or a sighting in 1987. Is that your start down the road to being a paranormal investigator or chasing these topics?
You know, George, it pretty much was. One fine day in 1987, right in the middle of London, I happened to have a UFO sighting, which was the first of many. And at first, I didn't know what I was looking at. And so I asked my partner at the time, could he see this through the window while we were staying as students in the city of London? Because it was a crystal blue sky day. It was about 2 p.m. and we're just having a regular conversation. And I'm standing by the window, and actually it was a row of 9 windows, and I see this object in the sky. And it was a cone-shaped object. It was pointed at the top, and it was rounded at the bottom, and it was rotating as it was moving through the sky. And so I knew it was made of metal because of the way the sunlight was glinting off it, and it was moving very slow. And so he came over to the window, had a look at what I was looking at. He said, yes, he could see it, and said it was a UFO. And I said, well, what do you mean, a UFO? And he explained. And I said, well, wait a minute. You mean that this object is being piloted by someone from somewhere else, not of this earth? And he said, that's right. It's come from another part of the galaxy, or it's either come from another dimension. And I was just baffled, George, by what I was seeing. And we couldn't take our eyes off this thing. And we watched it literally move across the sky in a anti-clockwise motion across the sky and out of view. And of course, I couldn't shut up about it. I had to tell everybody about it that day and that night, as you do. And we proceeded to go, I don't remember where we were going, but we were going on a tube station in London. And we came out the other end of the subway, and there is a guy selling newspapers at the entrance. And my partner says to me at the time, oh my God, look how UFOs on the front page of the Evening Standard newspaper. Now, there wasn't a photograph as such. I don't remember seeing a photograph, but we saw the headlines, UFO over the city of London. So we knew, George, we weren't the only 2 people to have seen it that day.
Heading down to the subway, there's 3 words you got to keep in mind. Mind the gap, right?
I knew you were going to say that. That's correct.
So you said that was the first of many. You saw how
Yeah.
many? You had a dozen other
I
encounters?
have actually, yes. And they've all been pretty much daylight sightings. One that springs to mind is when I lived in California. And this was in, let me see, it was November the 13th. I think it was a Tuesday evening at 6:45 p.m. And at the time I was married, so my husband at the time saw it with me. And we had just come from a friend's apartment. Actually, we'd just come from Jose Escamilla's apartment, the Rods guy, with the Rods phenomena. And I wanted to get home to watch the brand new show with psychic medium John Edward crossing over. And so we're in Studio City, we're at the lights, and just to tell you exactly where we were on Radford Street. So we've got CBS Studios on the right-hand side, we've got McDonald's on the left, we have a gas station on the right side, and we also have a bank building. And so we're waiting at the lights patiently for the lights to change. And it just seemed to take forever. And so my husband at the time said, oh my God, look at that plane. It's going to fall from the sky because it's too low and it's too slow. So I looked through the windscreen and I saw 2 white lights, bright white lights. And suddenly a 3rd light came on in the middle of this craft. And I said to him, this is no aeroplane. We need to pull onto the gas station and wait for this thing to come over. And sure enough, George, it was no aeroplane. It was well, first of all, as we parked our vehicle, we got the windows down on the car and we were literally hanging out the windows, looking up at the understructure of this aircraft, this spacecraft. And it was a diamond, an elongated diamond shape, black in color, and pointed at the front as a triangle form, and then boat-tailed at the back. And we, like I said, we were literally hanging out, looking at the understructure, the belly of this spacecraft. And it had a, what I can only term as a framework or piping that went around the entire craft, where you could see part of the sky from the piping to the solidity of the craft in the middle. And it had a formation of very, very cold white lights in V formation underneath it. So it literally stayed for about 8 seconds, totally silent, quite low also, I may add. And it took off in a movement that I say to this day, Steven Spielberg would even have a very hard time of, reconstructing how this craft moved. And it headed off over CBS Studios. So I said, well, quick, follow it. We've got to follow it. So we did. And we were up against red lights the whole time, the traffic lights, and we lost it over the LA River. So I said, well, we have to go back to the guard shack at CBS Studios, and we have to ask if someone there had seen it, because after all, that's the direction it went. So my husband parks the vehicle. I get out, I go over to the guard shack, I knock on the door, and a female guard comes to the door. And she says, can I help you? And I said, yes, I hope you don't think I'm crazy with what I'm going to ask you, but have you just seen a very strange object flying over your building? And she said, strange object? And I said, yes. My husband and I have just had an object fly over our vehicle. In fact, I'm going to call it a UFO. And she said, oh my God, UFO, UFO. And she pulled me inside, gave me a piece of paper and a pen, and asked me to draw this thing. So as I'm drawing this thing, George, she went on to tell me that they wouldn't have seen the object because the property of CBS Studios is covered in trees, which it is. And she said, and our window in here is anti-reflective, so we can only see ourselves. So I told her what had happened, and then my husband came. We were making quite a commotion about what we'd seen, and then another male guard came up and asked us what all the fuss was about, and we told him, and he said, you know what, I believe you, because I used to be a pilot in Missouri, and we used to see these things very, very often, not the elongated diamond shape that you've seen, but great big balls of orange light. And they would move over the mountain ridges, and they would stop stationary, and they would wait for us to catch up with them. And we'd be playing a game of cat and mouse like this over the mountains. So we never, ever could keep up with them. So he says, I believe his story.
So you've had several sightings, encounters. I don't know if there's any close encounters or closer than those. A lot of people wonder if these are just accidental, or whether this intelligence, whatever it is, reveals itself to people for a reason. Did this set you on the path of becoming an investigator, author, writer about paranormal, supernatural stuff?
It really did, George. I did not go looking for it, because my life was to be a classically trained musician. I trained as a concert pianist. So my day was always, 7-8 hour days of practice with my instrument. So that's the path I was on. So I didn't go looking for it. It found me. And I think, George, I'm not saying this happens to every musician, but certainly because of the sensitivity of being a musician, and the way we deal with music and we try to interpret music, one has to have a certain sensitivity with that. It's a universal language. And so I think because of that, that did have some attraction to me. But then again, I also have a fairly intuitive side to me as well, and have done since a child.
How would you describe yourself? I know you're an author, because I've got a couple of your books here that we'll talk about. You do investigations, you go out and interview witnesses and things of that sort. Do you call it paranormal? Do you call it supernatural? Alien, unknown? How would you label yourself?
Oh boy, that's a really good question, because no one has ever, I've had lots of interviews, but nobody's really ever asked me that question. I'm a seeker of the truth at the end of the day. And so I think there's so many categories to all of this. Yes, I want to call it paranormal. Yes, there's aspects of it that are supernatural. Yes, there are aspects of it that are unknown. So the unknown also incorporates supernatural and paranormal. So all of the above, really.
And you live here in Las Vegas, right?
I do.
What is it about Las Vegas? What's in the water? You know, I've asked
What's in
this
the
before. We talked to Shannon LeGros recently, and of course, my former neighbor was John Lear. We had Art Bell was a longtime friend of mine. Robert Bigelow, Bob Lazar, Harry Reid, even me. I mean, there's a lot of us here that are interested in this stuff.
There are. I don't know what it is, George, that attracts people really to the Silver City, Silver State here. I only originally came here 14 years ago because I wanted to buy a house and it was extremely expensive in California. So I headed out to this direction because I used to have a TV show in California. So I thought, well, if the TV show happens again, I'm right next door and it's just a plane flight away. So that's why I came here. I didn't come looking for paranormal investigations or anything of the sort. So it was really to buy a house.
Yeah,
And
you buy a
that was,
heck of a house here compared to what you could buy for the same money in LA. That's for
oh,
sure.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, over the years, over the decades, my involvement with UFOs, the main players, the main researchers, the best known were always men. You had Linda Howe in the back in the beginning, and she was there, you know, plunging ahead, very strong personality and intrepid investigator. Seems like now there are more women in the field, and how do you feel about that? I mean, I suppose that that's true in just about all vocations, but it is, I think it's especially needed in this field, people who have a certain sensitivity to these subjects.
Absolutely. And I think it's fantastic, George, to be honest, because it gives it a really great balance of, you know, the male and the female, the yin and the yang, if you like, of investigating what's out there. Because I think women can give and do give a different approach to investigations. They do have a sensitive side to them. And I'm not saying that males don't, but in the majority, you know, females do. And I was invited by a very dear friend of mine, Paula Harris, which I'm sure is a very good friend of yours too, back in 2012 to host the very first women's UFO conference in Texas, Glen Rose, Texas. So I was honored to be a part of that, not only hosting it for the weekend, but to also speak about my book, Alien Encounters in the Western United States there.
Has it been daunting to bang heads with men in the field who want to dismiss you because you're a woman?
Not for me personally, no. And I think mainly for me, George, it's because I am pretty much a strong female. I'm an alpha female. And so I tend to think, my brain, I think, is wired more along the lines of a male, to be honest, than a female. I tend to look at things a little bit more, maybe more logically, or I don't know, but I feel that about myself. So,
You mentioned your book, one of your books, Alien Encounters in the Western United States.
yes.
When did that come out? And give me your sense of, it has a lot of great cases in it, a lot of great stories with intimate details. What are they? Have you formed an opinion, or is it better to not lock yourself into a position on this?
I'm locking myself in on the position of this, George, because there is something at work here. There's something at play. There's something very strange going on in our society. And I wrote that book in 2012, and I wanted to write it because I wanted to, it's not a groundbreaking book by any means, other than I had my very dear friend, Dr. Roger Lear, write a section of it in there about alien implants. And the fact how he came on board with all of this eventually, coming from a skeptical place to a place of absolute belief of these very strange objects that were suspected alien implants. And so I'm locking myself in on that point that, yes, it's very real. Something is going on. People do have these objects in their bodies. I was actually present for the removal of one of these alien objects that Dr. Lear so kindly allowed me, he invited me to be part of it. And it was an airline stewardess who had, I believe she worked for American Airlines a long, long time ago, and remembers with her boyfriend back then, 20 something years ago, on a vacation in a hotel somewhere in California, I think it was. And they were told telepathically to go to the window. They didn't know why, but they look out the window and there is a disc with flashing lights all the way around it. And she said, and I heard this from the horse's mouth, this isn't hearsay or secondhand information. This is firsthand information. And she said, we saw the craft, and then all of a sudden we saw a ball of blue light pass through a closed window into the hotel room. And the next thing we know, it's morning. So we wake up, we start the day normal, we, start to have breakfast, and then suddenly it hit me. She said, and I said to my boyfriend, do you remember what happened to us last night? Because we were told to go to the window telepathically. We did. We saw a disc with flashing colored lights. And then this ball of blue light comes into the room, and then nothing. What happened to us? Well, he did remember it, George, and he was very fearful of it. And she said to me, in fact, that was the very last time she ever saw him ever again that day. She never heard from him ever again. But in the shower that morning, in her right forearm, she felt a lump. And she said, that's very, very strange and very odd, because I don't remember that. I don't remember having that before. And the fact that she could actually push this object up in her forearm, around underneath her skin. So she sees Dr. Roger Lear on a TV documentary some 20 years later. She kept it in her arm for 20 years, not knowing what it was, but she never had any pain from it or anything. Sees Dr. Roger Lear, and he invites her to have an interview with him, and they have a chat about what happened to her. And he says, well, let's get some x-rays done. Got the x-rays done. This thing was not metallic, as many of his other objects that he's taken out, removed, have been. This was biological, and it was in two halves. So it was like a clam, and it was creamy yellowish in color, and it had a black dark strip that ran down the middle of it. So the whole thing, just looked like a clam. And he said to her, do you want to have this thing removed? She did have it removed. And she said the same thing like everybody else when these objects are removed, that she felt a whole new sense of freedom. So, he took this object out, he kept it in a tiny vial of her body fluid, and he usually refrigerates it for 24 to 48 hours to make sure there's no change. There wasn't.
Without getting into too specifics, like all the cases, big picture. December 2017, we're coming up on the 3rd anniversary of this New York Times story. New York Times does a story and reveals the existence of an ongoing secret government study, Pentagon study of UFOs, ATIP. We subsequently learned through our reports that there was a larger project called OSAP that looks at not only UFO cases, but a lot of other peripheral phenomena, very strange stuff that is often seen in proximity to UFOs, that program called OSAP. So the public has learned so much more. We've seen these videos released by the Pentagon that say these are real, they are genuinely unidentified. We've seen the creation of a UAP task force, the Navy acknowledging that it is studying this stuff. I mean, it's a new day for you and I, people like us who have been investigating this. Are you encouraged by it? Are you hopeful that 2021 will bring more information and a better understanding? Or are you kind of suspicious of what's going on and what the motives are of the people who've been releasing this information?
I think it's a little bit of both for me, actually, George. Yes, I hope that 2021 will bring some clarity to all of this and some understanding, because we have been visited for a very long time. Things have been going on for eons, and the government have been heavily involved. They've kept it secret for a very long time. I don't think they knew what they were actually dealing with at the time. And that's why the whole secret of the whole thing, I believe. But I think, I still don't think they have all the answers. I think they have some answers. I don't think they have all of them. But, we've been waiting, people like you and I have been waiting for disclosure for a very long time. And we've always been told it's coming, it's coming. And, it's just around the corner. It never really has. It never really has.
No.
But in a way, it kind of has to the public. Do we really need our president, whether it's President Trump, who doesn't have much longer in office, or President Biden, to release information and tell us? I think we already know that it's here. So I don't think it's going to make much difference, really.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think I know you're absolutely right. Those revelations that started with the Times story and all that's happened in between confirms that the US government, the Pentagon in particular, takes this seriously, that these are genuine, legitimate unknowns. We don't know. And I suspect, as you do, that behind the scenes, they clearly have a lot more information, but I'm not sure that there is anyone that has the big picture and knows for sure what's going on here. But I'm encouraged that there is more openness now in discussing the need for investigation, something that started right here in Nevada from Senator Harry Reid, our longtime senator. I want to ask you about this shift from UFOs, which you've had personal encounters, into other phenomena, writing about other things, in particular about hauntings. So you have another book about haunted Las Vegas. Welcome to Haunted Las Vegas. Some really cool cases, intriguing cases. For example, hauntings at Nellis Air Force Base, which is pretty interesting because Nellis has a lot of history in the other topic we've been talking about. Is there something inside you that convinced you that these things, including the other topic we're going to discuss in a moment, are all related on some level?
I think they are on some level, George. Precisely what or how much, I don't know. But I think when we talk about most things that are unknown, it does fall into a category that there are they are related in some way. I don't quite know what, I just feel that it is. But yes, hauntings are very real, just as much as the UFO subject is. And I've had, again, not only personal experiences with UFOs, I've had a personal experience of a ghost sighting that was inside the Guildhall School of Music and Drama, where I studied as a musician. And again, I got to see that with my partner at the time, who I had the UFO sighting with. And it was headless. So, and she sat on the chair for quite some time. And it's the first time I'd ever actually seen a ghost. So my heart was pounding out of my chest. And I so badly wanted to speak to my guy at the time to say, hey, do you see what I see? But I didn't want to interrupt what was going on in the room at the time, which was a hypnosis session that was being demonstrated by two friends of ours. So we didn't want to interrupt that. And I think that's partly why she may have been pulled in.
Yeah.
Because of the hypnosis session.
Yeah. You did something to trigger it or draw it in. That's interesting. Open something up.
Right.
So it's not that far of a jump from investigating hauntings and writing about it to where your latest book is about near-death experiences. Consciousness has become such a buzzword in all of these communities that we interact with. And the idea that consciousness is the common link between UFOs, near-death experiences, poltergeist, maybe cattle mutilations, all these different things. But the thrust of, there's a lot of energy that I'm aware of going into near-death experiences, investigating in a scientific way, if possible, the continuation of human consciousness after physical death. Tell me about the book, I Survived Beyond and Back, what evidence you collected, and where you stand in terms of what you believe to be true.
Okay. Well, first of all, I felt I wanted to write the book because it was the actual death of my father 3 years ago that triggered this for me. I've always had an interest and a belief that there is an afterlife. There is something other than what we see here in the physical world, and that this isn't all that there is. And so, obviously, my father did not have a near-death experience. He had a full transition. But it put me on the path of wanting to find out what is it that people experience when they have these kind of events. So it took me about 1.5 years to write, actually a little bit longer than I wanted to write, because I was going through the grieving process of my father. And I know for sure that consciousness survives, not only because of what the subjects in the book have relayed to me through my research, but I have communication with my father on the other side, and it's very frequent. I know it sounds very, it may not sound odd to you. It may sound not odd to your listeners. Some might find it a little odd, but it's the absolute truth. I have communication, and what he does is he's told me basically that consciousness does survive on the other side, and he switches the light on in one of my guest bedrooms every month without fail. And he's been doing it for 2.5 years. There's only 2 months this year he's not done that, and I don't know why. It was the month of February and the month of September.
How do you know
So,
for sure it's him?
I'm sorry, George?
How do you know it's him?
I have, I should say, 2 very good spiritualist medium friends in the UK that I've been friends with for some 30 years. And one of them actually told me the specific day my dad would pass. And I was here in the United States at the time. Yeah. And she said to me, your dad is he's going to make a transition soon into the spirit world. He's being prepared. My dad had a heart issue and he had kidney issues. And my dad was 83 and he'd never had a surgery in his life, George. He was very healthy. And I thought, you know what? My dad's going to get over this. My dad is not going to transition. And she kept giving me a gentle nudge by email and telling me, you've got to get on a flight and you've got to come to the UK and see your dad. Well, I did. And I managed to get a direct flight from McCarran Airport all the way to Manchester, because my parents lived outside of Manchester. And that was on the 13th of November of 2017 to the 19th. And I could only go for the week because we had 3 cats. And so we had to have somebody come taking care of our pets. And so then, the person taking care of the cats had to then go on business. So I could only be there for a week. Well, it was very, how could I say? It was very timely that I was able to go for the week, because it was actually the last week. And one of my friends told me that, on November the 20th, your dad looks like he's going to pass. Well, I had to leave the UK on the 19th to come home. And my dad did actually pass on the 20th. I couldn't stay any longer. And sometimes, when psychic mediums give information like this with specific dates, sometimes they don't always come to pass. Nothing is 100%, even though she is extremely accurate, and she was in that case. But when it had happened to me, I had a conversation with them, two of my friends, because I was reading a book called Into the Light, which is written by a doctor of 2 care hospices in Texas, Dr. John Lerma. And he talks about what people see 3 to 5 days before passing, who are terminally ill. And it's deceased loved ones and it's angels. And so I was reading a chapter in the book that I was engrossed in. And this particular lady who had stomach cancer was telling the doctor one morning that she wanted to ask a couple of questions. And one was, why was she being visited by loved ones, deceased loved ones? And he told her in so many words, because he didn't want to speed up the process of her death, that, you know what, Mildred, maybe they're just popping in to check on you like I do every morning and just making sure you're okay. She says, well, okay, Dr. Lerma, but let me ask you another question. Why am I seeing angels? So she then described these angels, and she said, well, they always stand in a particular corner of the room. They reach such height of the ceiling, which I think in a care hospice can be no higher than 9 feet. They're pretty low in care hospices, especially in the UK, I know for sure. And she said they always illuminate a bright light internally that reflects outwardly, like a light bulb. And she said, we cannot communicate with you, Mildred. You have to initiate the communication for us to do that. And so she tried it and it worked, and they made communication with her. Well, at that point, George, I was so flabbergasted by what I was reading, and I was in my guest bedroom at the time. And I sat back on my chair and I said, oh my God, I wish my angels would talk to me. I would love for my angels to talk to me. Boom, the light went out. And so I sat there for a moment. I wasn't afraid, because I've had a lot of very strange phenomena happened to me over my life. And I waited for something to happen. Nothing did. So I then decided to put the book away, and I would read it again the next day. And as I got up off the chair, I didn't walk halfway past the bed, and boom, the light came back on. So I knew somebody wanted to talk with me. I didn't know who it was. I scooted up to the bed. I said, you know, I don't know who you are. I don't know if it's you, my angels, wanting to talk with me, or if it's you, Dad. But I have to thank you for doing that, because I know it takes an awful lot of energy to do what you've just done. So I'm very appreciative. Please feel free to visit me again. Cut a long story short, my friend said to me, this is not the work of angels, Tracie. Angels do not need to flip lights on and off to get attention. They are of a much higher realm. This is your dad making communication with you. And so I've had many of the signs along the way, George: feathers, pennies. He sends me hummingbirds. He sends me dragonflies. And I've heard my father leave messages on EVPs.
You know, a lot of current research involves looking back at the work that's been done in previous centuries. In the 18th and 19th centuries, the elite academics, the finest minds of those times, were interested in this, pursued it through mediums, trying to establish communication, and had some success and wrote about it. Then, you know, over the years, there have been so many mediums that have been exposed as fraudulent. Science in general has turned its back on this, the public as well. Now, it feels like it's turning a corner because of near-death experiences. The research into NDEs, some of that is very compelling. I find it very compelling when someone says they've been somewhere else and they have a particular point of view in which they see things that they could not have seen otherwise. They're aware of things that are confirmed in the physical reality. You've got some of those in your book coming up, right?
I have, yes. I have a number of subjects who have had near-death experiences. Some have actually had, they don't know whether to call it an NDE. They are on the fence whether it's an NDE or an OBE. Now, the two are very similar. And I suggest in the book that NDEs are actually a subcategory of an OBE, but it's more of a forced out-of-body experience due to traumatic situations, whether it's a cardiac arrest, whether it's an intense accident, vehicle accident, a drowning, or even if it's something like childbirth, for example. It's a forced out-of-body experience due to trauma. They do have similarities of, you know, being outside the body, floating outside of the body and looking down on their own physical body. But there are also differences as well, like I said, where NDEs are only really more of a traumatic experience. I've never had an NDE personally. I've had an OBE, so I can relate to some degree, but I've never actually been to that place that my subjects talk about, which is the tunnel of light and, the tunnel, seeing the light, seeing deceased loved ones or anything like that.
We have about 2 minutes left in our time, a lot of time, Tracie. Let me ask you this. You write in the book about Evox, this device that's been developed by some researchers in Arizona that is like a spirit phone, which is, you know, Tesla and Edison were both working on a spirit phone when they died. It was the last big project for both of them. Is this legit?
It's absolutely legit. And I can tell you wholeheartedly here, George, that these two people, Tony and Sherry Rathman, they're husband and wife. They are a phenomenal paranormal investigations team that live in Arizona. I first interviewed them in 2018 on my radio show with KGRA. And Tony, I should say, had built the box, Evox, the very first Evox. And last September, I asked Tony very kindly if he would try to do an experiment to reach my dad. And this is how the whole thing opened up. And I know we're short on time here, so I'll get to the point of it. But I'd heard my dad at one time actually just say the word yes when Tony asked if he was present. I heard my dad very strongly say yes. And then I sent Tony an email with a photograph of me and my dad together when my parents had visited me on my birthday a number of years ago, 2012, I believe it was. And so I sent Tony the photograph just so he could see what my dad looked like. He has never met my dad. And so I didn't know that Tony was going to do an experiment with it. So he switched on the Evox, which he's built, as I said. And when he does that, you can actually, I've heard it with my own ears, spirit actually flock to the box. And they even address Tony by his name. Hey, Tony, or hi, Tony. And it's unbelievable. And he has this certain relationship with them. And so he said, and I heard it all on audio, I'm looking for a specific gentleman of the name Dan Austin. And so I'd like the spirits to move away from the box. And Dan, if you can hear me, I have a photograph here. You should know who's in this photograph because one of these people is you. And I'm a very good friend of, your daughter. This is how we started off. Very good friend of your daughter. She would like to receive some type of message from you. So I'm holding up this photograph. Who's in it? And you hear my father say, that's my daughter.
That's a great story. There's so many more in the book. When it is out late in December, we'll have you come back. We'll continue the conversation. Tracie, thank you very much. We'll post this on the Mystery Wire and we'll include information about how people can contact you. And I'm sure we'll be in touch again.
That will be wonderful. Thank you, George.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.